is Morning Joe. Now, look, in the main, I don't care about Morning Joe. But the reporting is that Joe Biden, sort of in the same way that Donald Trump watched Fox and Friends, Joe Biden watched Morning Joe. Now, Donald Trump watches a right-wing show full of morons, as opposed to Joe Biden, who watches a right-wing show full of mostly morons. So there is a distinction there. One is totally morons, and one is mostly morons. But here is Morning Joe. Remember, this guy came in with Newt Gingrich. If you don't think, and people forget this, Joe and Mika were praising Donald Trump almost up to the last moment, or maybe through the election. Didn't they go to his inaugural ball? Didn't they go down to Mar-a-Lago for the inaugural ball, or did they get disinvited at the last minute or something?
Yeah, I think there was some they reconciled after the initial conflict between them.
But these guys were pushing the hell out of Donald Trump. But so here is
and talking directly to him, just like
yeah.
I'd like to think that what the students feel about the university is important enough that maybe we could bring this university to a halt and really reorder its priorities. But at the moment, it doesn't seem that this is possible at all. We may halt classes for a few days. We may even halt it for a spring. But ultimately, we don't change the foundation of this university, which is essentially an enormous business corporation.
That was a Columbia University student speaking to NBC News in 1968 about ongoing protests at the school in opposition.
Pause it for 1 second. Let me just comment on what she said. It was both incredibly idealistic and rational, and an assessment that was accurate. Everything she said, 10 for 10, no lie, and indicative of some smart people go to Columbia. Good.
That was a Columbia University student speaking to NBC News in 1968 about ongoing protests at the school in opposition to the Vietnam War.
I've got to say, it makes as much sense in 2024 having 18 or 19-year-old people running college campuses as it did in 1968, which is to say, doesn't make any sense at all. And you do wonder where the adults are, the adults that are supposed to be running the university, the amount of money that they are paid to educate students, and they can't allow students to go to class because a small subset of those students and outside agitators want to shut down the camp. Where are the adults?
Can you pause it? I can tell him where the adults are. They're standing alongside. If he's referring to the adults as in the professors, the educators and the faculty are linking arms to protect students from being arrested by the NYPD. They are, in other instances, like at Emory, getting brutalized by the police in order to help and stand alongside their students. It's the administration responding to wealthy benefactors like Robert Kraft, who withdrew his funding from Columbia University, that are the ones who are making these protests unsafe for the kids. So that's where the adults are. It's just like the question is more about the educators and those doing the educating. They are the ones who say this is legitimate speech, free expression. I believe in what the students are doing.
How old are college kids?
It's the right. Well, yeah, they're adults. They're adults, but keep going.
Where are the adults? It's staggering. Not just to me. I know I'm a conservative. Not just to me, but to 90% of Americans. They want to know where the adults are at Columbia. They want to know where the adults are at Penn. They want to know where the adults are at Harvard. They want to know where the adults are at all of these college campuses.
You know what? The idea that, and we should say, something like 70% of the American public now gives Biden poor approval ratings, specifically on this issue. And for adults to expend their energy on protests that are happening, I mean, it's, what is it, 5 miles, 6 miles, 7 miles from here to Columbia? Or 200 miles, or 500 miles, or 1,000 miles? For adults to be worried about that, maybe they could do the extra 1,500, 2,000, 5,000 miles and worry about what's going on with the other kids that are dying. Like, Atrios had written something about this that was pretty good. And because so much of this is reminiscent of what we saw during the Iraq War in terms of protest, where the idea of protest and the way the protest is happening becomes, sort of the justification to ignore the reality of what's going on.
Even though
he goes,
yeah.
He wrote this on Sunday. Whether or not people in Gaza should be slaughtered in an ongoing campaign of ethnic cleansing and collective punishment has little to do with whether or not some campus protesters annoy you, a person 800 miles away from them. Quote, I think the cause could be just, but the people fighting for it have made me oppose it, quote, is never true. But this is the toddler level take our big brain pundits give us daily. Before the Iraq War, there were certainly many more pieces criticizing Iraq War protesters and the anti-war movement in general, or generally, than pieces written voicing their concerns in our elite newspapers. Quote, the Iraq War would be stopped only if the anti-war movement were different, but sadly they have not convinced me. A person mad at some random signs he saw highlighted on the conservative websites anti-Editorian-Rottweiler.com and ConfederateYankee.com was silly then, and its equivalent is silly now. Back then, quote, same side as Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, John Bolton, David Frum, and Norton Podarts, public figures with long, horrific records should have been a more important consideration than getting mad about a, quote, no blood for oil sign. But that's because people like making up excuses rather than acknowledging they've joined up with the baddies. Some real abuser behavior, too. If only you behave according to revolving rules, I wouldn't be such a horrible person. That's basically what we're looking at here. Is there more to this?
He then spreads misinformation.
Adults are at Columbia. They want to know where the adults are at Penn. They want to know where the adults are at Harvard. They want to know where the adults are at all of these college campuses where they're letting their students and outside agitators run across the campus, shut down debate, scream whenever anybody tries to talk reason to them, shout genocidal chants,
Look at Mika.
hold up signs pointing to Jews saying Hamas's next victims, holding up signs talking about the final solution.
Oh, give me a break.
Chanting constantly from the river to the sea. You know what from the river to the sea is? If you don't, that's all right. Most of the students chanting it don't understand that they are chanting genocidal comments.
Ask them what they mean when they say from the river to the sea. So yes, Hamas has included from the river to the sea in their charter, and Hamas is not an organization that anybody, I think, supports. When kids say from the river to, actually, except Netanyahu, by the way, is allowing Qatari money to go through to them. When you ask the students, point blank, what do you mean when they chant from the river to the sea? They mean one democratic state, equal rights for all. But that is not what Joe Scarborough wants to present there. He wants to make it seem like, oh, the kids just don't know what they're talking about. In fact, they're very educated on this.
Way smarter than he is.
Way smarter. I'll tell you something. The amount of shit that I have gotten in my personal life where people are sending me like, you should watch this video from, the actress who played Wonder Woman. And I'm like,
Yeah.
do you realize that I've been interviewing people on this topic for 20 years? And you're going to send me the Wonder Woman video and it's going to do what exactly? Like the level of this is what being brainwashed is.
Yeah.
This is what being brainwashed is. It is having a complete obliviousness to the enormous amount of information that you're not aware of, even though you're 100% sure that you are totally aware of it. I mean, I've had conversations with people who are adamant about their, sort of their pro-Israel stance, who had no idea that Israel controlled electricity, water, food going into Gaza.
They don't even
no
know
idea.
what a Nakba
Didn't
is.
know it was a fence.
Yeah.
Didn't know any of that. Like, I'm not even saying like
Basic realities
Nakba
exist.
is history, and it's a history that has been revisited and understood through the years. I'm talking about what existed 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
A month ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 7 months ago. Completely no awareness of even the facts on the ground as they stand today. Never mind what it was 60, 75 years ago.
Israelis don't know it, and it's miles away from them, the suffering that's happening. And so also, I just want to, like, the chance that he's talking about, we just had this story out of Northeastern where pro-Israel protests showed up and started chanting, "Kill the Jews." That was ascribed to by Northeastern in their statement, the pro-Palestine demonstrators, and then there were reporters on the ground, including an affiliate for Boston and NPR, and then the Daily Beast followed it up, which basically was like, no, that was the pro-Israel people trying to either provoke people or fool the university into thinking it was those demonstrators, and it worked like a charm. And also, Jewish students are overrepresented in the pro-Palestine demonstrations. Yep. Young anti-Zionist Jews, they're overrepresented. And their voices are being completely erased by like Biden's favorite cable show because it's inconvenient to the narrative. But they're literally screaming from the top of their lungs, stop focusing on us too. We want the focus on Gaza. And it's just like now that it gets to be campus politics, the right has weighed in. And it becomes about policing activists as, once again.
It is about brainwashing, though, and specifically like impoverishing all of our collective mind. Because look at the people we have to look to towards this. Nate Silver being like, oh, yeah, I think people pretty much don't know anything. Also, Fareed Zakaria, who I didn't know was anti-divestment in the South Africa case in college. But also, why has Gaza war spun colleges into chaos? Because campuses have weakened as actual communities where people mingle, interact, and First of all, from what I hear from professors that go and actually go to these encampments, is that actually that's exactly what they find is community for the first time that they've been teaching.
100%.
Yeah.
Ostentatious. Later in the interview, Donnie Deutsch, who I got to tell you, I've also interviewed Donnie Deutsch. He's a moron. I was sitting in the MSNBC Morning Joe table wanting to know why they weren't protesting that genocide going on in the Sudan. Well, here's a big part of it. We are not financing it. Yep. That's probably the first place I would start. In his estimation, only against Jews do people come out and protest. Somebody had this argument. I had this argument with somebody back in November. And they're like, how come it's only, Israel that gets demonized? And I was like, are you aware of the country of Russia? Like, do you really think that like people don't react to these things? It's absurd. We don't finance Russia.
Yes. I mean, the Biden welcomed the ICC issuing a criminal arrest warrant for Putin and is now trying to block it as they're doing the same for Netanyahu and Gallant.
There would not be nearly the level of protest we've seen in this country, sadly or not. Were it not for the fact that we are financing this.
Of course. Like that's another way they're trying to discredit the protesters, where like they're not sophisticated enough to make this link that there are other bad things in this world. No, actually we are, and people who are pro-Palestine are actually incredibly sophisticated in that way because it's the top recipient of our military aid, and the intimate relationship that the United States has with Israel is incredibly specific.
And bringing up the relationship like Columbia University has trying to expand to Tel Aviv, and those sorts of things getting pressure, I think these kids are right on the money right now.
And I liked that former spokesperson, Elion Levy, who got fired for being too bad of a liar for Israel, which is difficult, saying, I see all these Irish flags in pro-Palestine protests and also South African flags. I mean, you got to wonder. And it's like, dude, do you not realize what you're saying? Yes.
He doesn't.
There's a global solidarity movement for people who are victims of colonization. Yes, that's exactly it. And Irish people see a parallel in Palestinians' experience as the South African people.
What is it that you got to wonder about? Are like Irish people
foreign
particularly
infiltration? I mean,
nothing.
It's Irish.
Those secret infiltrators who bring in their own flags.
Right.
Amazing.